Now we follow the developing story out of Russia and a number of changes coming to the country's government and constitution. Just moments after President Vladimir Putin gave his State of the Nation address proposing changes to the Constitution, his Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev resigned, along with the entire government.
These changes, when they take place, and this will be done after the discussions, as was said, they will significantly alter a number of parts of the Constitution and change the balance of power, the executive, the judicial and the legislative powers. In this context, it is obvious that as the government of the Russian Federation, we need to give to the President of our country the opportunity to take all the necessary steps and decisions. And in this context, I believe it would be the right thing to do in accordance with Article 117 of the Constitution of the Russian Federation for the government to resign.
Well, the changes were a surprise to many.
According to the Constitution of the Russian Federation, the President needs only the State Duma's consent to make official appointments. The President appoints the Cabinet, his deputies, and all the ministers. I propose shifting this power to the State Duma, and also the approval of the Russian government's chairman. And at the chairman's suggestion, all the deputy prime ministers and federal ministers will have to be appointed by the president without the right to reject any candidates.
And shortly after Medvedev's resignation, Putin asked the head of the country's Federal Tax Service to serve as the new prime minister. So for more, we turn to author and Cold War historian Jeremy Kuzmarov. Thank you so much for joining me, Jeremy, on this.
My pleasure.
Okay, so Western media today, as this broke, was reporting that the Russian government has resigned as Putin proposes reforms which could extend his grip on power. Now, as I just heard President Putin say, it sounds like he's taking a lot from central and trying to break it out to the governors of the various regions in the country. Explain what exactly happened today.
Well, it appears that Putin has made, some constitutional shifts that will allow the parliament to appoint the prime minister and cabinet officials as well as top security officials. So this is a transfer of power more to the legislative branch rather than the presidency. So it can be seen in a positive light. Some are saying that because Putin's United Russia party controls the parliament, that they would appoint him as the prime minister so he could extend his rule after his presidency ends in 2024.
Well, and that's the thought. People are saying this is him just to stay in power. At the same time, has he hinted that that's what his plans are? It said that there was creating a new governing position for him to occupy, I even read. I haven't seen that yet. Is there a new position being carved out that has not already existed in the Constitution as it stands today?
Not to my knowledge. I think Putin may also be trying to refurbish his image because the sanctions policy has had a very negative impact on the Russian economy, and Putin's poll rating, Putin has sustained very high popularity ratings throughout his years in power. Those numbers are starting to slip a bit, so he may be trying to refurbish his image and push out Medvedev, who became somewhat unpopular because of the pension reform and the raising the retirement age generated some protests. So Putin may be trying to distance himself from Medvedev and that policy and trying to refurbish his image, but I don't think he's creating any new positions.
Well, and that's the thing, a lot of Americans over here will remember Medvedev originally. He was the one that had the conversation with President Obama that said, just wait till I get reelected and I'll be able to do a lot more. That secret conversation that was recorded went viral over here in the United States. That's the most exposure that probably us over here in the United States have had with Medvedev and what his history is. But, talking about President Putin, when he's been in office over the last 3 years, he has done something by replacing 36 of the 85 regional governors and 20 new provisional chiefs. And he's done this with people that are under the age of 50. So he's lowered the average age of governors from 55 to 46. Something that we here in the United States complain often about is that everybody in Congress is so old that they cannot have in any way an idea of what's going on with the younger generations in America. So do you think President Putin is trying to bring in this next generation of leadership that possibly might not have some of the ties to some of the problems that Russia has had in the past, including those with communism and those that we've dealt with in the 80s and the 70s and prior to that?
I think that's the case, yeah. And in many ways, Putin is a very visionary leader. He's been maligned and demonized in the West, but he is quite popular in Russia. And he has promoted a lot of far-sighted policies. I mean, he has promoted a lot of diplomacy in the international arena. He helped to broker the Iran nuclear deal, and he was trying to keep it together up to the last minute. Now he's involved with diplomacy in Libya. And within Russia, you know, he salvaged the Russian economy. He took more national control over Russia's economy from the era of Boris Yeltsin, which had opened it up to Western exploitation and imposed these shock therapy policies of rapid privatization that proved disastrous for Russia. So Putin has a lot of accomplishments in his tenure, and in many ways has been very visionary, as much as he's been maligned in the West.
Well, and I like to call things, I'm a ball and strike caller on this case, but, you know, I watch the media, and they have cast Putin as being authoritarian, as you pointed out. But they're now criticizing him for proposing these changes that are still going to have to go through some process, which shift these powers more to Parliament. He wants to limit the president to 2 consecutive terms. That's it. But term limits, so you want to get power out of the central office. You want to do term limits. Sounds kind of familiar to another government structure that I know. Do you think, is this because the Constitution, the government that was set up, is so new in Russia after they went through the reforms that they had to do at the end of the Cold War? Is this basically a natural process of finding the government structure that fits best with the country that is it's governing?
I think absolutely, and I think it's healthy for any political system to, you know, have changes put in place periodically. I mean, we need a lot of changes here in the United States. So, and yeah, people forget that. I mean, the Russian communist system had become very ossified, and a new constitution, you know, was put in place. But a lot of the reforms are very haphazard that, you know, were instituted in the 1990s. So Russia is still kind of sorting itself out, learning how to govern properly in a post-communist era. So I think some of these reforms, yeah, are natural and also very positive because it is shifting power to the parliament, and it shows that it's not a pure authoritarian top-down structure in Russia, the way it's sometimes depicted in our media, and Putin is not a clone of the Soviet leaders.
Well, and that's what I'm kind of laughing about on this, because we here in the United States, we hear that we need to reform the Second Amendment. We need to reform, we need to do constitutional amendments all of the time proposed for it. And we have, you know, we have less of a history than Russia does, but our Constitution is a lot older than Russian. So the fact that they are trying to change it to possibly might fit better, I'm kind of shocked at kind of the backlash that it's gotten today. But I just have to ask you, do you think this was a surprise even to those in the Russian government? I mean, they have to admit, just like we'll admit, the Constitution isn't perfect, especially one that's so relatively new in the grand scheme of things.
Yes, I think it is a surprise because it came suddenly, and it may be a political maneuver by Putin, again, because his popularity polls are sinking a bit, and the Russian economy has suffered from the sanctions, so he's trying to refurbish his own image as a reformer. But, yeah, it came very suddenly, and perhaps at an opportune moment for Putin, and it could, you know, generate more support for him. He still has 4 years left in office and for his United Russia party. But it may be a positive in the long term for Russia.
Well, time will tell. And like I said, I think it would be great if the rest of the world kind of just let every country handle their own. And in this case, I hope that outside influences and the pressure and the PR, positive and negative, can just stay out and just let the people within their country work it out amongst themselves. Thank you so much for joining us on this.
My pleasure, and I agree with your assessment.